Hello and welcome back to Veteran Instincts. We are back on Vassal and back in the Vagabond Open. Previous episodes, we've learned a lot from good players, so we thought that this round we'd get a more sort of mediocre player on to talk us through and see if we could learn anything from that. So we've got a game for you here between Veteran Instincts' own Lloyd Boman and Guy Wilson. We're also joined by Ben to give more insightful commentary than we are capable of.
That is outrageous. Hello.
Lloyd, why don't you take us through the matchup? Tell us what you were thinking, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, thanks for that very kind welcome to my own channel. I appreciate that. So yes, this is our Vagabond Open game. So this week I was looking at running Imperials, and so chose what was basically the world's winning list, won by Ollie. It was created by Chris Bankson, who we've had on before, but I've changed it entirely, and I've added Crackshot onto Whisper. So this is a completely new creation of my own doing.
It really felt like it was lacking something when it won Worlds, didn't it? I think
yeah.
you found the magic special sauce there.
I think when Ollie was running it was 196 and 197, then it went up a little bit in points, and at that point I was at 199. And bidding 1 point with this list seemed slightly irrelevant. So I thought the Crackshot would be actually a useful addition.
Nice. That makes sense.
And then Guy had brought the classic Inferno Swarm, which again has seen a points change because Harunner went up recently, which means that he loses the 4 Crackshots that the Inferno pilots had originally.
And so what did you think sort of when you saw the matchup? Obviously you've got a heavily AC list versus like as classic as you can get TIE Swarm. Difficult? Winnable?
Yeah, definitely not a match that I was excited to see. One of those that I knew the theory of from episodes like this and from talking to Swarm players that have sort of spoken about how to counter Swarms. And also from indeed our own episodes where Chris has come on and talked about how to fly aces. So I had a lot of theory going into this, and this was a chance to then see if I paid attention to any of it.
So we thought we'd start the video paused this week and really go into kind of turn 0. One, because Lloyd is actually very good at it, much better than I am, and certainly I think one of the better players I know at sort of really thinking about turn 0 and having a plan. And 2, because it's particularly important versus a Swarm, and there's quite specific sort of things you can do versus a Swarm with turn 0.
So it looks like you've placed the classic stop Swarms from turning in rock here.
Exactly that, yeah. So what you're looking generally to stop Swarms doing is setting up in a corner, 5-forwarding on our opening turn, and having the entire option of where to turn into. So this rock here prevents them banking in easily on turn 2 and just takes away some of their options and forces them to have to think a bit more about their engage and not to be able to control the entire board. So we were both 200 points, so we rolled for it. Guy won the roll-off and gave me initiative, which is why I'm placing this first rock. And you'll see that my second rock, so the third obstacle we place, is going to go on the exact same position on the other side.
So it looks like it's quite far into the board. I think that looks really nice. It's like as if there is a rock in the corner plus range 1, right?
Yeah, it's just beyond where a 5-forward will take you.
Yeah.
So if you had where it says 0 points per guy on the screen, if you had ties set up in that corner, your 5-forward is then going to put that rock in the way if you want to bank in. So it actually stops or it hinders all of the moves from that corner going up to a 5-forward if you want to bank or turn in on the following turn.
Great.
And so why don't we roll this forward? Obviously, you sort of, and we'll talk a bit about what we think Guy's trying to achieve, and where your kind of final rock goes. It sounds like you've sort of decided where the second rock is going to be. And so yeah, Guy heading into the corners here, and I think that's probably correct. Obviously, with the Swarm, you're going to fly around in a block, at least in the sort of start of the game, and you want to keep the field as open as possible. I'd be interested to see whether those small rocks actually would fit into the near corners.
That's what I wondered, yeah.
And that sort of maybe sounds counterintuitive to people. That sort of why do you put rocks nearby and close into a cluster? But as Lloyd's described, already the kind of approaches up the side of the board are blocked off. And so doubling down on that and putting the small rocks in and around that area isn't actually going to cut your options down much more. And if you were able to get all of the rocks on your side of the board, then a couple of quick moves at the start of the game, and then you're in the open on the other side of the board and kind of have potentially taken rocks outside. So maybe for Guy looking back, and maybe for Swarm players in general, if your opponent does know what they're doing and is setting up those rocks to stop you turning in, maybe kind of double down on it and just put rocks in the same area. What do you think?
No, I think that's completely fair. If you can get to a point where, if you have a list that wants a wide open field and to have space to be able to maneuver around, as a tie swarm does, because you're flying it as a big block for the most part, being able to completely ignore rocks by setting them up all near you and just going straight past them gives you a huge open field to maneuver in, and then set up your blocks, set up your kill boxes.
The only thing I would say is if you do say, okay, fine, I'll put them in my own corners, like you can't like that corner is then really funneling you. So sometimes I will put a rock, if I want to put a rock on my own side, I actually put it in the middle on my side, because then he does have these two corners to come in early. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
I just wonder whether he had sort of managed to get them all on his side. He could almost then even have set up in the centre, just 5 straightforwarded through them, and then his banks and his straights are all open for next turn wherever Lloyd's going. As it is, Lloyd's placed the 5th rock there, just range 1 of one of the rocks he placed at the side. And Guy, he's got pretty wide open gaps through most of the rocks, but there are that cluster on the left-hand side of the board that presumably, if you had a choice, Lloyd, that's where you would want the fight to happen.
Absolutely. So the rock that I've placed does 2 things. It further discourages him from taking that top edge of the board, which is by the biggest rock. So it means that he's less likely to set up there, and that's now the place I want the fight to happen, because I've got a cluster of rocks I can hide behind, and because they're rocks, a cluster of obstacles that Guy can't just ignore entirely and sail through with his TIE fighters, because they run a real risk of taking a lot of significant damage.
And so we see Guy starting to set up here, and I thought that this was an interesting choice. And I think that he's thinking about it and has kind of reacted to the fact that those side rocks there have kind of forced him out the corner, and sort of realised that he doesn't want to 5 straight down a board edge and get stuck fighting there. So he's sort of taking a more central setup, which is, I think, unusual with the Swarm. I'm not seeing a lot of people do it. But it does keep his options open for that first turn. If you set up directly across from him, which I seriously doubt you're going to, but he can go 5 straight and head straight towards you. But if you set up in the corners, he's got his hard turns, barrel rolls. He can kind of stall where he is and try and draw you into this more open side of the board. And so looking at that central deployment, what were you thinking?
I was a little bit surprised by setup in the middle. It wasn't something I necessarily expect him to, because it gives me a flank option with one or either of my ships. But I think with the rocks, the setup the way they are, it's actually not a bad shout for him. It's probably the least bad choice he has available. As I say, it is giving me possibly the option of a flank, but he's not immediately surrendering huge parts of the board with that positional setup.
He's actually covered like from certain flanks if he doesn't come too fast, right? Like the rocks you've put in, which stop him from doing the blitz up the side or whatever you talked about earlier, you can kind of use them to sort of as like a handoff if he needs to stop a quick flank, and as long as he doesn't roll in too fast. It seems like your setup here is you've got flanking options and just try and force him to commit, like see which way he's committed and then flank with the other. Is that
absolutely? Yeah. And what I want, as I say, is I want the fight to happen in the top left-hand corner of that board. So I'm going to have Vader going up in that direction anyway to sort of have the rocks as cover in the initial engage and not give Guy easy approaches on it.
Right.
And then make him have to turn into those rocks if he wants to get shots on Whisper and Vader.
Yeah.
And we'll see that in a minute, but I think it's worth noting, so having not flown a huge amount of Imperial Aces before, my setup with Whisper is actually far from ideal. So I'll throw this to you guys. From where Whisper is, what would you have done differently with it, or what issue does it kind of pose me with where she is?
Well, I think the thing with Whisper, right, is that Whisper does that very few other ships do, is the decloak. So you want to have multiple options open every turn, even from the start of the game, because it increases the burden of execution on your opponent and gives them more things to think about. And I think setting Whisper up as you have done, I don't mind him being set up as far up the board as possible, because it allows that decloak downboard without running into trouble with this rock that's cornered up in that corner. But I think setting up at the back edge means that you're not going to be able to get beyond that rock on the first flank. So I think he needed to set up slightly further forwards. Or Alternatively, if you do set him up slightly downboard, you want to set him up so a 3-bank kind of ends him up maybe in front of the rock and then can then come either side of it.
No, absolutely. And that's exactly the mistake I made here, that Whisper's in a slightly wrong position. And with my plan to kind of slow roll into the engagements and make Guy have to commit, I leave Whisper in a position where she has limited choices for decloaking next turn, which doesn't work terribly because I'm trying to slow roll and bring him into a corner. But I have fewer chances to correct it, as we see here, because Guy opens with a 5 forward and comes sort of flying out of the gates at me.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a thing, I think we've talked about this before, it's just always nice to do with aces, is literally just point yourself at a rock and then make the choice of your lane afterwards. And with Whisper, you don't have to do it there and then on the turn. You point yourself at the rock and then next turn, okay, where do I want to be? But it's not like a bad setup at all.
Yeah, it's just it's not perfect because it narrows my choices slightly.
Yeah, I kind of like him coming in fast because it means like you can't, if you want to do nice flanks and whatever, you need to get into position for it, and he's giving you less time to get up there, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think this fast and aggressive open. I mean, if I've done anything with Vader that isn't turning away, Vader's immediately in trouble, right? If I even decided to just 1-bank and see, I'm not in a position to get back facing a board edge, like a top or bottom of the board. So then the next turn is going to be really hard to get away. So that opening is actually, I think, really interesting.
That's it, and it is interesting that you both say that, because normal caveat, I'm not having a go at Guy, and you can see that the 2 other commentators think this is a good move. I think that 5 straight is a horrible opening, and the reason I say that is that if you look at the board state now, where do these ties go next turn? It's virtually impossible for them to turn up to the top corner of the board to go after Whisper and where we suspect Vader's going. The banks are blocked for the front row. The hard turns will have the back row facing in an awkward position for next turn. Equally, he cannot hard turn the ship's left either, because that rock on the other side is there. So he sort of placed himself right in between those 2 sort of important rocks from Lloyd. And it feels to me at this point that actually Lloyd has the opportunity to get 2 flanks, to shoot down both sides of the board edge and get round behind the tie swarm. To be fair, at that time, as Lloyd has already mentioned, Lloyd's opening with Whisper is very suboptimal. So that has kind of given Guy a bit of a pass, because Whisper isn't in as good a position to kind of take advantage of that. Guy's going to have another turn before Whisper can get involved.
Vader here is checking a target lock, and this is purely spending a force that doesn't cost me anything, because I'm going to regen it anyway, and I'm clearly well out of range. But this is me not very many games into Vassal, still learning range control, just taking every opportunity. And you'll see me do this a few times with Vader, just checking range, making sure I've got my eye in before it comes to important decisions. The second thing that we missed was with Grand Inquisitor. The original plan was to 1-bank him in and then look to barrel roll left and just hide in this bottom left-hand corner. But Guy's opening, being as fast as it was, meant actually I couldn't do that, or shouldn't do that, because it left me fewer options next turn and could have really resulted in Inquisitor getting boxed in. So I undenied for a bit and decided to boost right, because it still gives me the chance to threaten a turn in next turn or to disengage.
Guy has a good opportunity to threaten the Inquisitor next turn without being threatened in return. So, like, say if he banks left a little bit and then the Inquisitor can't joust it, Whisper can't blitz in quickly enough to flank you. So, the reason I kind of like it as an opening is he can threaten left and then hard turn right to then, if you come in on him, it doesn't have to overcommit anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you were to roll the video back and watch it, there's a bit of a hesitation as I debate what Grand Inquisitor's going to do.
Yeah.
And that's exactly that. Looking at where does this bank boost, or where does a barrel roll leave me, and then what are my options next turn versus what does Guy have? Because at that point, Guy has his entire dial open. So it's looking into the future and trying to work out the action I take now, though we're more than half a board length away from each other, is going to impact my choices and my options available to me next turn.
So just while you're talking about the Inquisitor, is your thought here, I'm going to blitz straight off the board? Because it seems unlikely that he would hard turn left, obviously, to cover that. He can't do that, right? So your safest bet is to just blitz up the board and try and get past him. What were you thinking about?
Yeah, so he's got 2 options here, right? So it's unlikely he wants to split his swarm.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, that's not true. He's got 3 options, right? So he can 5 forward everything and chase after Vader. And if he does, Vader's running into a corner, but it's not ideal for Guy.
Right.
He can bank everything to the left and try and trade shots with Grand Inquisitor, in which case a 5 forward is my best option. If he's chasing after Darth, then banking him with the Inquisitor and taking shots into the side of his swarm is my best option.
Mm-hmm.
But he can also one turn everything left, or one turn the back row left, and bank the front row left, if that makes sense. So the front one's all 2 or 3 bank down, everything else with one turn, and that covers everything on that side.
Yeah.
And if he does that, then a 1 bank to the Inquisitor is the best plan.
Okay.
So immediately we're into 50-50 decisions here on which is the safest and which is the scariest thing to do. And if I was running this TIE swarm, I'd definitely be tempted by the 1 turn.
Yeah.
It doesn't leave you in an amazing position next turn if Grand Inquisitor has turned in.
Yep.
But I think it's unlikely he does, right? Because it's incredibly aggressive to turn in and just a TIE swarm all on your own.
It makes it also makes his next turn really difficult, right? Like,
yes,
insane when 1 turn's left, then it's really awkward with that rock.
Yeah, so he probably needs to spend a turn or 2 to bring everything back together. But if the price of that is he kills the Grand Inquisitor, then it's definitely a worthwhile trade.
I like that after 1 turn, that's the sort of thing that you're having to think about.
Absolutely, right, yeah.
So to rewind all the way back, because I thought it was such an important point, you were talking about the boost to line yourself up along the board edge with the Inquisitor, and sort of for the newer viewers, the importance of that can't be overstated. If Lloyd had barrel rolled or done anything to stay in that corner, then there is nothing to stop the entire list 5 straighting or 3 banking, combination of the 2, and then the turn after Lloyd is trapped. Where does he go?
Yeah.
Giving him the option here of the turn in, so something to think about, or the fast move up the board edge really sort of pins the TIE swarm where it is. It's much harder now for the TIE swarm to 5 straight, because if Inky also 5 straights, then he's immediately on the flank. The downside for me of the opening 5 is that all of the turns to the right are very difficult. But I do think that the good move out of everything you discussed, the one I would have chosen if I'd have thought of it at the time, is the front row of ties bank to the left, probably a 3 bank to sort of make up as much ground as possible. And then a combination of 1 or 2 hards with the back row of ties to catch, to punish the fast move from the Inquisitor. And if you were to do that and the Inquisitor does go fast, then he's taking some shots this turn, and next turn he's running towards ties and is then very easily blockable.
Absolutely. And it's worth noting again that this rock, the second rock I placed, so the one that the ties are now coming toward, is still an issue guy, right? Because it's placed in that position, so the 5 forward still puts it in the way. Like, what he would like to do is just ideally bank or turn everything into that space, but that rock is still meaning he's having to go around it and account for it.
Yeah. And I think what allows him, so he's obviously done the first half of this with the banks, what allows him to do this is that suboptimal opening from Whisper and the hard disengage from Vader means that he probably does have the time. If he were to have hard turned that back row, I think he probably did have the time to get everything back together, because you've made it difficult for yourself, and getting through those rocks is going to take a couple of turns for Vader and for Whisper.
I called a move. This never happens.
And so we can see. So he's banked down, and as Ben said, it's nice in that it threatens the Inquisitor, and I think it's also nice in that it does keep that hard turn right open for next turn to turn back on Whisper and Vader, who are probably going to be the ones who more consistently take damage, and also the bigger guns, so the kind of more scary 2/3 of Lloyd's list. Now, Lloyd, you've got repositional options here. What are you thinking?
So what I'm looking at is boosting one either straight or to the left. To the left is going to give me shots, but I'm going to be trading. And at this point, I'm working out how many shots I'm trading with. I think it is just going to be Sane and Howrunner. But I'm looking to see whether it's Del as well, because obviously with Howrunner rerolls, that extra tie, the numbers start adding up very quickly. But eventually I decide that the 1 bank is safe, and it does come past Del because he banks slightly faster. And will just squeeze me into that gap, and I'll only trade shots with 2 ties.
So having said all of that, with the decision to boost in there, how much were you thinking about next turn? Because I think it was a mistake. I think you should have gone 1 straightforward boost.
Okay, so it's a couple of things. So I'm not expecting to take any damage for a start, because I have 4 green dice against the 2 shots coming in, and I have tokens. At worst case scenario, I'll probably take 1, but even that I feel like it's unlikely. And then in the same process, I'm mostly looking here at setting Whisper up. So you see here, Whisper is barrel rolled towards the rock, and this has now given me choices with my decloak. So I have the option to decloak left if I want. and keep range. And the only actual decloak I had in mind at this point was a decloak forward and a turn down to get shots into the back of the tie swarm or into the side of it as it turned back up towards me. So I'm very aware of time. I'm very aware of the fact that his list has Iden, so my best shot of the game probably doesn't happen. And I'm aware that I need to start putting damage into his ships before too long, because one bad round and I can easily lose half a ship or a whole ship, and his ties are so cheap, I need to kill 2 ties to make up for that. And so I'm aware very quickly that I need to be putting damage into his ships, and I need to do that having made him spend Iden.
That makes sense. I suppose, I think for me, the shot you get by boosting in is not a high quality one. It's through a rock. You're going to be reticent to spend mods because that increases your risk. And the problem with this position for me is next turn, where the best you can do to come round onto these ties is to bank. You've cut down that hard turn that clears stress. You know, that one hard is not going to fit. And so the upside in terms of expected damage, I think, is low. And we can see here, you get a good hit, but into equally good evade dice. And the downside, really, I wouldn't expect you to take damage in either position, but the downside, I think, is the kind of slight limitation next turn. Whereas I think I might have been tempted to boost straight and to actually not take the focus, so to keep my dial open, to keep that stress. So then you're taking a range 3 shot and a range 2 shot, both with a high chance of being 2 hits, but into 3 dice and 4 dice with force. And I think that for me, the benefit there is that then next turn, you've got the 3 hard and boost to get into the back of these ties, which you just don't have open anymore. So I think there was, it's a small difference, but I think for me, I prefer the positional side of the 1 straight more than the shot and the position that you end up in here. Talking about Whisper and Vader, again, I think it's not necessarily a better or worse, but I think I'd have been tempted to push Whisper up. The 2 hard here with Vader for next turn, 2 hard right, is that something you'd consider? It's sort of it fits, but it's dangerous, right?
It's terrifying.
So this move is there to threaten Guy, to make him consider it, so he can't just have free access to the Grand Inquisitor, right? Because if none of my other ships are in position to threaten him or to get anywhere in a position to be putting damage into him, then he has free reign to just K-turn basically everything and go after the Grand Inquisitor and chase him. So this turning from Darth Vader, again, I actually have no intention of turning into that gap, but I need Guy to be aware of it and need to account for it.
Nice.
And if I can make him turn up, then he's coming into the area that I want, which is where I wanted the engage to happen, as he then has to account for Brox.
You would have needed to put Whisper in a different spot, but did you consider, because I think what I might have done is the 3 bankers you did, but then maybe even spend an afterburners so that Darth is kind of basically where Whisper is now, but facing towards that top board edge. Because that also threatens the hard turn in, but into a slightly less scary position for Vader. But it would mean that you'd sort of had to push Whisper further forward, which maybe you don't want to do.
Yeah, spending afterburners, repositioning around the board when you're then burning to get away, like face away from a tie swarm, doesn't seem ideal with only 2 charges. I kind of want to use those where I'm either dodging arcs or getting into a kill position.
I suppose I just think that the 2 hard in here is so unlikely as to be kind of easily ignorable. Whereas if you were around the top edge of that rock, then you've kind of got better options for next turn. And I suppose also if you're not going to, the disengage, the non-committal move from here is a hard disengage, right? It's the 1 bank up board, again puts you 1 or 2 turns out of the fight, rather than if you were where Whisper was, kind of a bank, which would mean that you could get back into the fight in a single turn. Again, not.
Yeah, but again, what I'm
trying
to do is I'm trying to bait the ties into that rock formation. And so I'm happy for Vader to not be in the fight for a turn or 2, because I don't want Vader facing into a tie swarm, because he's too many points and can die too easily.
Yeah.
I wondered when you set up, did you specifically, so you said you want the fight to be up top. You've offered up the Grand Inquisitor because he's cheapest?
Partially, I mean, Guy went for him, right? So it was slightly.
But it seemed he was the more likely target because the rocks are more awkward as well.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And I think if Guy's opening had been different, then my response to it would have been different as well. Right? My original plan was to stay back in that corner and kind of just barrel roll on one turn around until he'd committed. But because Guy opened so fast, it kind of forced me to react to that.
So what's happening this turn? What are you thinking? Before we see the dials, I'm really interested. Are you assuming him to K10 or hard 10?
So why don't we pause the game here for that reason? Okay. So 1, 2, 3, pause.
How are you guys on time? I think I'm usually a second or two behind.
I'm
23:42, but actually let's rewind to I want to be moments before he's turned. It's 23:13 I'm on.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so 23:13. This is before you decloak as well. Okay, so hopefully I haven't made that too difficult for myself in terms of lining everything up in a minute. Ben, why didn't you ask your question and we'll go from
there? So before we look at the dials, what are you thinking in terms of Guy's move here and how you want to react? Because, before we even go on there, my feeling is with swarms, you kind of have to react to what they're doing and kind of look for ways to poke them. And so here, absolutely. It seems to me he can either K-turn or he can hard turn. Sane doesn't want to K-turn because that's and it doesn't. So my feeling is probably I'd be playing around a hard turn right with him.
So that's exactly what I'm expecting from the ties. And I think this turn, so having baited with Vader and shown that the option of a 2-turn in is viable or is something I can look at, and I've also, again, looked for a target lock to kind of show range and seen that if I'd been able to put a lock onto the Academy tie, it would have been perfect because it threatens even more.
Yeah.
But it was just short. So I'm expecting him to turn right and go into where Vader and Whisper are.
Yeah.
But obviously I can't guarantee it, so I have to a little bit account for both. So I'm playing as though he's going to 2-turn in, but then Inquisitor is being just cautious enough that if he is K-turning things, I can account for that. And so I'm keeping the rock in between where he would be in that instance.
Because you can just bank in, and if it's bad, you can barrel roll away. And if it's good, you can either lock or boost or whatever, right? Is that what you're thinking?
With Inquisitor.
Or are you thinking just to play safe?
So it's a little bit play safe. So I'm thinking just something like a 2 forward, I think is what I do here.
Oh, okay. Just not commit. Yep.
Exactly that, right? So that if he has turned the back set towards me, I've got the ability to boost out of the way. If he's got K turns, I can sit behind the rock and roll to distance and just token up and hopefully survive that. And if he's turned behind or turned for Vader and Whisper, then I'm in a perfect position behind him to just take 3 shots. Not this turn, but for all the following turns.
Yes, okay.
And the Whisper position here. So this was the plan for Whisper for the last probably 2 or 3 turns. What would you be looking to do for Whisper from this situation?
I think that the more obvious move is the decloak forward, sort of turn in, and then from that position, you're probably kind of firing into the side of a lot of these TIE fighters. I think if you were to 2 straight forwards and then do a sort of 2 or a 3 in, then you take relatively few shots and you start to get that opening fire going. And as you say, with Iden on the board, you need a good opening shot. You can't really trade in the opening engagement. You can't afford to sit Vader in front of the TIE swarm really at any point during the game, but certainly not when Iden's on the board, because not only do you take a bunch of damage, but there's a likelihood you do 0.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you see with my Whisper this turn is exactly what I'm doing, is decloaking forward and then turning in. I wasn't confident, again, being this is a fairly early Vassal game for me, I wasn't confident where the 2 decloak forward, 3 turn down the board was going to end up, and what I didn't want to do was clip the large rock on the engage. And so you'll see it twice where I kind of slightly doubt myself. So the turn before, when I barrel rolled sideways and not forward, because even then I wasn't sure where it fitted, and I'd looked at this dial for a while and still wasn't confident, and so I ended up putting in a 2-turn rather than a 3-turn. And you'll see this as it comes. It's not quite as far as it should be.
Yeah, and exactly that looks to me, although I can understand your, obviously, but if you're not sure, you took the safer one, right? The worst case scenario is you're sat on a rock and not shooting. So you took the sort of definitely not that, but actually I'm assuming that with the 2 straight 2 hard, what you're going to have done is cut off your decloaks to the right the next turn, because you're going to be level with that big rock rather than in front of
exactly that. Yeah.
So I think, sort of looking back at the tie swarm, I think the other issue, Ben, with the bank left from Grand Inquisitor here is that we need to remember Grand Inquisitor is moving before Howl Runner. So not that he's going to bump him, but it does. Howl Runner will be in the way and limiting his repositional options.
Did forget that.
Having said that, with the tie swarm, I think the hard turn is right, is kind of what we expect. But I wonder if a sort of K turns from the ones that can, and the hard turn from maybe Sane, who doesn't want to go over that rock, is maybe a more conservative play. I think it does 2 things. It puts Ox towards the Grand Inquisitor and means that he probably has to spend another turn being careful, not engaging. You don't just give him the back of your list for free. And it also puts more distance between you and the other 2 ships in Lloyd's list. You know, you're going to be sat just in front of this sort of middle finger rock down in the bottom left-hand corner. And you're still going to have the banks and straights open to kind of continue scaring Inquisitor or to turn into the fight the turn after. And I think delaying the fight that 1 turn keeps you out of those rocks at the top of the board for a turn longer.
Yeah,
and might be better than the hard turn.
I like that a lot better.
So, having said all of that, let's see what happens. And we'll start to see the decloaks and the dials going down here. And so Guy here going with the hard turn. Having seen that, I think we can pretty safe to assume that he's going to do that with the entire list. Doesn't seem to be a reason to to bring the Academy pilot into harm's way if the rest of the list aren't backing him up.
Yeah, absolutely. And at this point, I must admit, I'm feeling fairly good about where it's going to end up.
Yeah.
Because Whisper's going to have gone round the vast majority, if not all, of his list, and then he barrel rolls it.
You know what I like as well is like all this talk of all those rocks are awkward for him. He's in a really comfortable position to fly.
He is, absolutely. Yeah, he's done a really good job of getting around them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that barrel roll's nice for that reason, isn't it? It sort of puts more pressure onto Whisper, and opens up sort of a bigger space between those 2 rocks for the list to come through next turn. Obviously, you have to be a little bit better at swarms than I am to start barrel rolling some of the ships and not all of them.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking about that, man. Like, okay, this guy barrels, then I might blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
But you can see really nice job being done by Guy here. Flying the ships that close together really does require a very good judgment of the moves to sort of be able to do these moves without being too scared about bumping. And self-bumping with a swarm even more worrying than with other lists, because as soon as you get them at different angles, then as the game goes on, it becomes harder and harder to avoid further bumps. And with these 3 agility, 3 health ships, are going to live or die a bit on the basis of whether they got tokens. So Guy doing quite a nice job from that point of view as well. That those two TIE fighters that are a bit more vulnerable, that have barrel rolled and haven't got their focus, have at least tucked themselves in behind the rock. So probably have traded the sort of lack of focus for an extra agility die from the obstruction.
I like that you can do this with this list as well, because you don't have mods, but you have Howrun,
Yes, so your offense doesn't drop too much.
Yeah, having not played against that Howrunner list in a while, I'd forgotten how reliable it is.
Yeah.
But it's always a surprise that you come into the first round of combat and everything is just hits all the time. You're like, oh, that's how it works.
Oh, Whisper. Oh.
So yeah, at this point I'm kicking myself, right? Because the 3-10 would have been perfect. It would have let me barrel roll if I'd wanted to.
Right.
It would have given me decloaks next turn. As it is, the 2-10 takes away almost all of those options. I now only have 1 decloak option for next turn. But having said that, it's not terrible. I think I'm out of arc of most of the ties. So at this point, it's just a case of deciding how offensive or defensive I want to be with the list. Whisper has passive sensors, so if I want to lock something, I have the option to. But after umming and ahhing about barrel rolls for a second, I do focus up.
So if you look at it, you're taking a range 3 from Iden, and 2 of these shots are going to be obstructed. So it's not great, but it's not like, oh god, I'm dead.
Yeah, so
it's going to be dicey.
Yeah, I think Iden actually, I think, might be out of arc.
Okay.
And so again, Vader
yeah.
doesn't want any part of this.
Yeah.
And I think we see here, what I don't want to do is end up spending too much force, because expecting that he's going to be involved in combat next turn, I don't want him to go into it force-starved.
Yeah.
It's very easy to take multiple actions this round and be like, oh, I'll have a lock, and then I'll barrel roll, and then I'll focus just in case. Because again, still being as it was in early game, a little bit unsure about ranges. And then next turn you roll into combat and you only have one force.
So just looking into the future, the Grand Inquisitor next turn is going to be in an amazing position.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's great. You're under threat with your other 2 ships, but
yeah, he has the option to come hard for Vader next turn.
Yeah.
And it depends entirely on just how Whisper does in this combat, right? So whether she's in danger or not.
I think that it looks very even. I think had you done that 3 hard and given yourself the option to go either way next turn, that I'd massively favour this position for you.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the ability to come to the right-hand side of the board as we look at it would present real issues for Guy in terms of where he takes the TIE Swarm next. The position of the Grand Inquisitor is obviously lovely. I'm going to go back to that bank boost rather than the straight boost and say that you could have got there 1 turn earlier. You could have been having shots this turn, but it's not a big difference certainly. But Vader a little bit out of the fight and Whisper a little bit pinned down.
Yeah, so Whisper takes the easiest shot she has to get damage, which is into the Academy because it's unobstructed and because it doesn't have a token. And the reason for that is because it gives me an extra evade token.
Yeah, which makes sense. And you start to sort of make Guy make choices about spending Iden if it all goes well. Yeah. So 2 hits here from Whisper, and the Academy rolls 1. So that's a nice early plink damage into the Academy pilot there.
Gets you that evade you desperately need. That's great.
Absolutely.
So range 3 shot obstructed here from Howlrunner. Howlrunner in 2.0 getting her own reroll, which is very nice.
Yeah.
And using that for 2 hits. And a little bit unlucky there. She could have got away without spending a token there. And you decide to spend the force, presumably while you have the focus available to spend it on?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just giving myself the option that if I roll multiple focus results in a future turn, the focus gives me that flexibility, whereas the force doesn't.
And the evades are always going to be useful on any roll.
Absolutely. Obviously, aiming to keep 1 evade still so that I can decloak next turn, but I've still got 3 tokens for if in an emergency.
This looks like Del.
This is Del's shot, yeah.
Oh god.
Secrets, but got shields, so no worse. But that's an unhappy sight. So even with the 3 evades, and so you have a choice here, right? You're obviously going to spend 1 to reduce the incoming damage. And do you spend the other? At what point do you kind of think about spending that second evade? How important is the decloak to you?
It's pretty significant because of where I am. Even though I've only got 1 decloak option, from where I am, I've got almost nothing on my dial that's any good. Here we see, obviously, that Iden is out of arc, which I was fairly sure of, but not 100%. So the decision to take a shield on Whisper there was fairly easy.
And then just the Academy pilot as the final shot. Again, range 2. Again,
wow,
1
you weren't
hit.
joking.
And with the Howlrunner reroll.
Oh dear.
More suboptimal dice.
So definitely spending the focus, and then
it still feels like you keep it, right? Because these are things you have to think about when it's happening. You're like, okay, do I take another shield and have no shields left? If I do that, what are the moves available to me? I mean, at the moment, if you keep your evade, the only thing you can do is decloak right.
Yep.
And after that, yeah.
But if I stay where I am, so I've got obviously my entire dial open, but if his Academy tie K-turns and everything else, ignore Del for a second, the other one's 2 bank up.
Yeah.
Then that's a lot of space that I can't get out of with a single maneuver and a single barrel roll.
Yep.
So after debating it for a long time, I accept that 2 damage from a lot of very suboptimally modded shots is an acceptable outcome, and I keep my evade cloak.
I think that the sort of tipping point there for me in the decision making is twofold, really. That I feel like if you do stay still, your only choice is to hard 1 ship left with Whisper to keep him safe, and that turns him obviously entirely out of the fight for a turn.
Yeah.
And is suboptimal.
Oh, it's so much harder to read now. Like if you look at it, where's Whisper going? You're like, which is
Well, I
great.
think-
now I've given myself a third choice, right? So I've got
Yeah.
the option to stay cloaked and still turn Whisper
Yeah.
left, as Paul said,
Absolutely.
which is still far from ideal. But now she has 4 agility and not 2, so it's an option. I mean, what would you guys do in this situation? What would your expectation be? Also, bear in mind, it's worth noting I still haven't spent Iden charge and have a risk of losing Whisper here.
I think I still hard left here. I think the decloak to the right is a very aggressive move. You'd very likely bump.
Yep.
The thing I was going to say in terms of the additional benefit of cloaking is that you do get that free evade, right? So you're going to run in with evade and a mini focus, but I think you likely bump and you likely take a lot of fire. I think that the hard one left focus means that you're going to take fewer shots. They're all going to be into a 4 or 5 agility ship with a focus, and then you have the decloak options next turn. But the downside of that is it does take Whisper out of the fight. Whisper then would not be a distraction from the TIE Swarm, not this turn, but the turn after, going after Vader, which is
Absolutely.
what you don't want.
Yeah, and this is my main concern, I must admit.
Yeah.
And then you also start to worry about running out of time. These games are an hour plus 2 turns. And on Vassal and with people being new to Vassal, certainly with a Swarm, that can result in quite low turn counts in the game. And if you were to be in a situation where you hadn't scored any points and suddenly one of your ships gets halved, then you start to look like you're in a bad spot. So I could see the argument for being aggressive, but I think I would be more defensive.
The other thing, you've mentioned it already, but with the Iden charge still up, being aggressive doesn't get you enough, because like you're not going to kill stuff quickly enough before it shoots you back, I think, with only these 3 ships. So Whisper probably gets bumped, doesn't have great mods.
And then at most gets Iden to spend his charge.
That's my instinct.
I agree, but
yeah.
sort of the counterpoint, I suppose, is that you need to get Iden to spend. So as I said, I would be more defensive, but my hope would be that the Inquisitor coming in could kind of get that Iden spend out of the way, and then you'd feel slightly better about a more jousty turn in the game after that.
Vader's only option here is to start turning towards where the Swarm is coming, which is troubling. We've gone so much on about Whisper, but what's the thoughts there?
I think Vader's okay. I think the hard 3 keeps him away from and I think he's still got the option to sort of run along the top board edge the next turn if he needs to.
So what were your thoughts, Lloyd?
So I was, having seen that exchange, I was expecting Whisper to take a bunch of damage this turn and possibly die.
Mm-hmm.
And what I wanted to do was basically trade her for something. Now,
okay.
Again, obviously, Iden still hasn't been used, so if I'm trading over the Iden charge, it's far from ideal.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some upside to that, right? Because if I can put damage into something, even if he uses Iden, the attack still hits, and so it gives me a second evade. And so now I've got 2 evades and a force token, even if I'm bumped, to weather the storm.
Mm-hmm.
What I don't want to do is disengage him fully and leave Vader to do with an entire Swarm, because again, he's not durable enough to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, you're going to see in a second Whisper is going to decloak. And now at that point, I had a couple of options. My initial instinct was a 4 forward, just to try and get out and give myself as much space away from the ships as possible. But the risk of a 4 forward was that he would block it with Gideon, and I would have no shots at all, but still be taking some.
Yeah.
And so I decided to dial in a 3 bank.
Okay.
And accept that I'm definitely crashing into things. But I hope that I will manage to jump at least 1 or 2 of the ships, bump into a third, and take 2 or 3 shots.
And from the TIE Swarm point of view here, I think sensible moves. I think you do that too straightforward. That looks like a nice place for Academy to be from a blocking point of view. Not only is it a nice place to block Whisper, but it keeps the arc wider. You know, a faster move would have made it easier for Vader to get out. So you I think you focus here, and you may well end up with a pot shot against Vader as well. And then I think, okay, shows what I know. And then I think the rest is sort of combination of straights and banks to kind of fill up that space.
Yes, I think this barrel is clearing room for Del to come in. I think he's more interested in Del having an action than the Academy. I can see the argument for it, and it keeps the Academy's arc wider, but an Academy with no mods, or probably no mods depending on where Howrunner ends up, is less threatening to Vader for sure.
Yeah. And the other thing that barrel roll does is it means that Whisper is likely bumping, is not going to bump the Academy, is going to bump something else, and the Academy isn't going to have a shot on Whisper.
Yeah, absolutely.
So were he to have kept the Academy where it was, even if Del bumped into the back, that's another 3 dice going into Whisper, which now look like they're not going to happen. And that, with a 3 health Whisper, could easily be the difference between a dead Whisper and a limping away still alive Whisper.
Because you must be pretty happy now, like knowing the move you've done. You're like, okay, cool. 2 of the ties aren't shooting me.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Yeah. And
I
a
think,
third is bumped.
Yeah, what Guy was looking to do was to barrel roll Dell out of the way so that he cleared room for Iden, and then realised it didn't fit. I think, again, a bit more familiarity with Vassal, and he probably would have done Iden and Dell the other way around.
And so I think maybe, and this is a very minor criticism, but maybe Guy guilty of sort of trying to achieve too much with the swarm on that turn, trying to get too many people to complete their moves and have actions, whereas maybe accepting that, okay, well, this guy's going to bump and let's just get everyone else a focus token might have been a kind of more optimal play. Inquisitor, obviously, we didn't even bother to talk about the Inquisitor because his move was that obvious. And there really was nothing Guy could do about that. The sort of moves to threaten the Inquisitor coming in let Whisper off the hook. But the downside is the Inquisitor obviously now boosting into range 1 of Howlrunner, but Howlrunner gets a move, but is now in the side of that swarm, and the swarm not only this turn but in future turns is going to find it slightly difficult to deal with him.
Inquisitor doesn't need to be in range 1; he can always just spend a force to do so. He's already got lock focus. But the idea behind this was, if next turn he goes hard for Vader, it gives Grand Inquisitor the chance to keep pace. Right. If I hadn't banked in there, it's then much harder for me to get into a position where I can easily keep shots on. It's a minor thing, I think, but it's,
No, I think it's correct, and you're going to keep the pressure up, and unlike not having to spend the force is nice, first of all, to sort of be naturally a range 1, and also unlike in first edition, although the Grand Inquisitor can give himself the range bonus, he doesn't take away your opponent's range bonus. So the Inquisitor does not want to be at range 3 shooting at stuff because they'll have higher agility.
Yeah, absolutely. So just while Vader does actions for a second here, just give some thought to who you would shoot with at Whisper, and we'll come back to that in a second.
I want to shoot Iden because you got the range 1 crack shot. It's perfect, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely perfect, because what I'm trying to do is either put damage into Iden or make him spend the Iden charge now and get out. And so the crack shot just helps me ensure that I don't need to spend my force for offensive mods.
Right.
And I still have the ability to put damage through. So for some reason I decided to passive sensors here with Vader, just because, I guess.
Good habit.
Yeah, sure. But the lock here is useful because it tells me all of my ranges before I decide the rest of my actions. So I can see that at this point, Howlrunner and Iden have got shots into me as well as the Academy. So I take the lock on the Academy as the thing I want to shoot at, and then I can barrel roll out of range of the other two if I want to. Right. Now, obviously, Iden is definitely choosing a Whisper, but Howlrunner I don't think has arc.
It's certainly close.
It saves me
at
least one shot, potentially 2. And of course, Gideon and Sane could kill Whisper before Iden fires, so it could be taking 3 shots. And so a barrel roll here that I'm doing with perfect information because I've measured for a lock to everybody lets me make that decision knowing full well what it does.
And we'll spend some time just talking through these shots, because obviously with Iden it's a kind of unique piece, and the timing on when and if you spend Iden I think is interesting. So Vader here taking the fully modded shot into the tokenless Academy pilot and gets a not wholly unexpected hit crit. So the first difficult choice about Iden might be coming up here. The Academy needs 2 natural evades to survive here.
I mean, do you keep it for an Academy?
Oof, and gets none of them. So that's the exact question. This is the first opportunity. Do you keep an Academy pilot alive?
So if you're thinking not under, it's always, as we say all the time, it's really easy to sit here with no pressure, and you think, okay, what's the value of the Academy? There's the points which are cheap. He's gonna have a single modded shot into Vader, and whether he can block. So those are the sort of things that start going through my head. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm just interested what goes through your head if you're making that decision.
I think context is important. So I've heard people say, "Oh, no, you would never keep it. You would never spend it to keep an Academy pilot alive." But I'd argue that if that's the only thing likely to die this turn, I would, because I think the extra bodies on the board, extra blockers, extra things to shoot about is important. I think the thing that tips it for me this turn is the Whisper shot into Iden.
Because if you spend punched in the face,
if you spend Iden here to protect the Academy pilot, you run a high risk of losing Iden himself, or indeed allowing Lloyd to switch target and take out Howlrunner. both of whom are far more important to the list. I suppose Iden arguably not if he spent his charge, but are far more points, and that is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And Iden here has a range 1 shot back into Whisper, right? So, I mean, I'm averaging on 4 dice 2 hits and a focus result. I have the focus and I have crack shot. So the average is, if he does spend Iden here, that I 1-shot Iden with Whisper.
Yeah,
and I think it's the right decision.
And you're right, and so he hasn't spent Iden, and he's taken the damage, and the Academy has died. And yeah, absolutely. In addition to everything I said, keeping Iden alive keeps a better shot alive, rather than a range 3 single, half modded shot into Vader. You get a range 1 modded shot into Whisper instead.
So it's, I mean, the way you're talking about it, which is interesting, and I like a lot, is it's less about, okay, is it worth saving the Academy, and more about, well, Iden charge is way more valuable elsewhere.
On this turn, in this situation. And I think if that Academy was the only thing to die, then I'd have done something different.
No, I understand. So, not the most amazing Whisper shot.
Yeah, 1 evade, and I spend crack shot because I get slightly eager, but I want him to spend the charge.
Yeah.
So, we've got the same decision again here. So, Iden looking at taking 2 damage if he were not to spend the Iden charge. And it looks like he did that. Is that correct?
He does, yeah. So, I think half points is enough to kind of scare him off, and so he does spend the charge at that point.
The Inquisitor at this point, taking the shot into Howlrunner, the better modified shot.
Hello.
And Howlrunner having to spend his focus to take a crit, which is...
Blinded Pilot, I believe.
Blinded Pilot.
Yeah. And so worth noting that even with Iden cancelling the damage, Whisper's attack still hits. And so she still
So he got his evade. Yeah. And so interesting. I think would have been tempted to keep the Iden charge even then. And I'll sort of explain why, and we'll see if you think there's any merit in it. I think had he not spent and Iden gone down to 1, then Iden's still alive, and he has options for what to do. He can prevent damage on Hal, who
imagine if Howlrunner died there.
Yeah, and so Howlrunner could have died there. Howlrunner has taken a crit, is nearer to death, and I think at the point where the Iden charge is spent, Howlrunner is definitely a more valuable piece. So I think with Iden going to be staying alive anyway, I would have saved it and either kept Iden alive if the Inquisitor had shot at him again that turn, or you had the option at least to kind of prevent damage coming into Howlrunner. Because I think that charge is more problematic if it's still on the board at this point than it is at this stage.
It's surprising, like you mentioned earlier, that some people say, "Oh, you always spend it." Like the amount of conversation we've had just about the Iden charge makes it seem to me it's outrageous that people ever say, "Oh, yeah, just use it."
Yeah. And so Whisper here,
hello,
dodging the first shot, but a big hit coming in here from I think Gideon. Rolling 1 evade and spending the evade token, and Stern takes a damage. We missed the Iden shot there, which didn't do any damage. So I think there's only 1 remaining shot coming in. Yeah.
Oh no, Sane shot first.
Oh, okay. So that's
an evade against Sane. I spent a force against Iden, and I spent an evade against Gideon and still took 1.
So with all of that, a pretty good outcome from that turn for you. I think the fact that Whisper only took 1 more there, you did have a lot of defensive tokens, but that feels lucky.
Slightly. I mean, on average, she takes about 1 point of damage more than she does there. And not that dice work that way, but I felt like that kind of offsets the turn before where she took more than she should have. And so I think it got a bit lucky for sure, and it was kind of making the best of a bad situation.
But again, it shows the sort of the difference, right? So you have come out of that on that turn on 2. Had that Academy stayed where it was and not barrel rolled, obviously impossible to know at the time and easy to know now, but you'd have had an extra shot into Whisper. Vader may not even have had a shot this turn, or if he had, would have had to stay in that sort of slightly more precarious position he was in before he barrel rolled. And that extra shot into Whisper, or extra 2 shots into Whisper, may well have made
the whole difference. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? Just looking back now, then obviously the choices, the obvious choices that seem to be Paul saying you hard turn left, run away with Whisper, and you're like, I'm just going to embrace the trade. Looking back, do you think you would have changed it? I mean, it seems like this the way you talked about it, I think it's a really interesting choice. So, what do you think looking back?
So for me, if I'd done the one turn,
Yeah.
then everything plus Howl Runner would have still got shots into Whisper. So yes, Whisper
Yeah.
would have had more token. Oh, sorry, more agility, but fewer tokens.
And you're getting shot at for nothing. Like you get
Absolutely.
nothing. Yeah. Oh, I think it's just like the being willing to push it and risk it.
And the main difference for me, as I say, is now the item charge is spent. Now I have free reign to put damage into things if everything cooperates.
Mm-hmm.
How it's turned out, it was definitely the correct choice.
But that's different, right? I'm not saying like, oh, well, obviously this was the right choice because it worked out. That's what the harder thing to pull out is. Like, okay.
I wonder, and I think what you have to look at is how does this situation look if Whisper is dead? Because that could have happened. That is not not a hugely unlikely outcome to the position that he's ended up in, and certainly, as we've said, may even have been more likely had that Academy pilot stayed still. And at that point, it's still not awful. The Howl charge is spent. There's a ship off the board. Vader and the Inquisitor can deal with the rest of this list. So that may suggest that it was always the right call. But the fact that Whisper has come out of that only taking one more damage means that I think Lloyd is in a very strong position here.
Well, you're in the position now where you can remove ships before they're shooting at you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So from this position for you guys, what would you do if you're running a TIE Swarm? What's your thoughts here?
So the nice thing about Vader's position is it's not easy. Like if you wanted to, I have no idea what you're thinking yet, but like Vader could blitz out of here. You could like 3-bank left and afterburn. Or you could joust him and say, I'm going to remove ship. The Inquisitor's in this delicious position where like you've just latched onto the back of him, right? So
I think the percentage play with Vader is definitely the 3-bank away, boost around the rock if you need to, either for position or defensively. And I think the reason for that is that although not up on points, you are certainly up in terms of ships and positioning.
Yeah.
Yes, it's brilliant. If Vader turns in and one-shots Howl Runner and takes a shield or two in return, that's brilliant, and you're up on points and it's all good. But you still have a more exactly. You have a more difficult turn for Vader the next turn because he's flying in towards ties, has to worry about blocks, and if he gets halved, it's a disaster, right? And then all of a sudden you're way behind.
We're coming up on an hour as well, so there are 3 rounds left of this game.
Yeah.
So you just embrace the fact that Inquisitor can chase them for free. Vader gets away. It's like, let alone that he can get around that rock, but the way the rock is for them, like turning towards Vader is a nightmare. So are you just going to rely on the Inquisitor shots? Like, what's your thinking?
And so the converse is true with the TIE Storm. I think you there's definitely, it's a harder choice with the TIE Storm because Guy doesn't know if Lloyd is going to make the correct choice or not, right? So he could think, okay, well, I'm in a slightly bad position in terms of the ships left on the board. I need Lloyd to make a mistake. I'm going to go hard for Vader. I'm going to keep distance between myself and the rest of Lloyd's list. And if Lloyd turns Vader in, then hopefully that will go well for me. So I think an option would be to send everything straight, turn Del up, get focuses on the ones that haven't gone over rocks, and then put yourself kind of in, just sit yourself in between these top 2 rocks on the board. Again, if Vader turns in, I think that's a lovely position to be in. And if he's gone away, you've got the short K turns, the 3Ks next turn, to turn and face the entire board again. So I quite like that. The downside of that is that it has Sane and Howl Runner going over a rock, and that is obviously not insignificant. I think the K-turn here from Del is a good alternative option, and maybe suggests that he's going to be sort of continuing to pressure Whisper. So maybe we're expecting kind of K-turns from Iden and Gideon here as well.
Well, Del was in the best position because like Del now has options next turn, but it does involve splitting. Okay,
so I think we see here, just as Iden K-turns, Guy, I think, sensibly continues to pursue Whisper, but then makes his first, I think, probably major mistake in that Gideon's K-turn doesn't fit. And he has 4 K-turns available to him, right? He has the option to K-turn longer, but just misjudges it and it just clips.
It's very close, to be fair.
It's very close, absolutely. Yeah. But again, it's how conservative you want to be in that instance, right? Because he doesn't need 2-3K. The 4K is still going to get him shots, and he's still going to be chasing Whisper next turn.
Yeah, it was an unnecessary risk, right? The benefit is minimal in that the maximum you get out of it is that it reduces the range of fire, but the downside is huge in that you've now got a ship not only not taking a shot at Whisper, your intended target, but stressed and pointing out of the fight. I think the only upside here is if Vader turns in, and even then it's a sort of single modded shot. I like the same move. I think you have to do something about the Inquisitor, and I think that blocking him is important. I think if you just allow the Inquisitor to kind of roll up and take fully modded shots into the back of your list, you end up in trouble. And
yeah,
so I think the same move is
I think
sensible.
of letting the Grand Inquisitor become predictable, right? And so
Yeah.
Guy does a really good job of calling that. He's unfortunate in that Inquisitor has full force and has a lock on Howron already.
But again, with that Gideon, with the shame of that Gideon Cater not fitting, the Inquisitor could have potentially been taking a number of shots here, bumped, which not a position he would love to be in. And so, yeah, as predicted, we do get the Inquisitor bump, but only, depending on what Howron does, only taking 2 incoming shots, both at range 3, both maximum with 1 reroll, and as you say, he's got full force available.
And then the Howron bump is again because Gideon was too aggressive with the K-turn, and it needed to be longer, and that would have left space. And again, I think that's just getting a little bit too kind of focused on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and also maybe it's Vassal. Vassal is different to normal X-wing, and the judgment of maneuvers is difficult. And we're saying, it was a risk. It may have just been simply that the guy thought it fit, and if he was 100%. Confident it fit.
Oh, I do it all the time. This isn't like a outrageous mistake to make at all. So in your mind, there was never any thought of like being aggressive with Vader. You're like, nope.
No, absolutely, yeah. Low on force. I don't have a lock on anything, so if I do get blocked up, my shot is ineffectual, and I've only got a force defensively, and there's just no upside in going in. Yeah. Now, I'm still aware that I am down on points, and there are now only going to be 2 rounds left. But where Vader is, I quite like for next turn. I still have an Afterburners charge. It's fairly obvious what Sane is doing next turn, and so Vader can fairly easily threaten that if he wants to. And there's some cheap points to be picked up there.
And so Inquisitor here, presumably she's going to Howron, or he's got the stake and damage, he's got the lock. Spending a charge for the 3 dice. And spending the lock.
He's just not that blockable. If he's already got the lock, it doesn't really mean anything.
They will have to spend everything here, and you do. You spend everything for hit crit. Which is saying I think you can afford to because of the poor quality of the shots coming back into you, especially if Howron is dead.
Only one got through though.
Only one got through. So another crit. We're looking for the direct here for this to definitely have paid off. Get a disable power regulator. Yeah. So it's iron for next turn. And again, I think you could afford to spend, you spent a lot, you spent all your tokens there, all your defensive stuff, but you have a range 3 unmodded shot coming in because Del is too far away from Howl, and you have a single range 3 shot with a reroll. So unlikely here to take significant damage. Okay, so Howl there, no shot. Whisper obviously has no shot. And we're on to the ties.
Decides he doesn't use Howl on the rerolls, and then Grenadiers just shrugs it off.
A little bit of, always a moment of anxiety there where your opponent sort of gets natural 2 hits and you're like, no, this could go wrong.
There was a lot of anxiety in this game as a whole, I think. So again, into Grand Inquisitor because he has no tokens.
And this time you do have the reroll. Oof, blanks. So the 1 reroll.
I think rerolls into a blank again from memory.
And the Inquisitor breathes a sigh of relief. And then from downtown with a reroll, not impossible, but unlikely, and not going to do significant damage. Not going to take Vader to half here. Gets the 1.
And so
rerolls, and Vader. Vader having to spend the force to not take any damage.
So Vader can 3 hard boost if he wants. Murder, say.
Absolutely.
So now you're 9 points up.
With 2 rounds to go.
There are points available on Howrunner and Sane, it looks like. But you also don't want to be. You're not far enough ahead that you can just you can't just. What are you thinking about? Because you can't just be like, cool, I'll just kill those. They're like, well, I'm also, if I get half here, half there, it's not a straightforward one.
Yeah, absolutely right. So I'm confident that Vader is in a good place to come down and threaten Sane.
Yep.
Howrunner's crit, I don't think we spoke about, was the disabled power regulator, so I know exactly where she's going to be.
Yeah, she's
And so this turn, and I think the next couple of turns with Whisper are trying to get Whisper in a position where she can then get those shots and finish off Howrunner, whilst also kind of crab walking out of the fight.
So there are 2 turns left or 1?
There are 2.
So Whisper has the time to reposition this turn to get back into the
Exactly,
the
yeah. Grand Inquisitor is an interesting one because Sane is K-turning behind me, right? There's nothing else that she's doing. and she's accepting that Vader has her flank. But then the combination of Iden and Dell have a real potential to get in the way and cause issues for Grand Inquisitor.
I mean, he could take a lot of shots this turn.
Yeah, so half of Grand Inquisitor is more than half of Power Runner.
Yeah.
But I think I'm right in saying that trade still leaves me up.
Okay.
I'm just thinking. I think there may be 3 turns left in the game, actually, from memory. But 2 or 3, certainly coming towards the end of the game. From the tie swarm point of view, you need to pick a target here. You need to score some points, and you're in a slightly tricky position. The easiest thing to focus fire on would appear to be the Grand Inquisitor, but he's unfortunately also the tankiest in that he can force evade and certainly is harder to damage than either Whisper or Vader. So I don't know about the options. I think Sane has 2 options. I think the K-turn is fairly obvious, but I think there is some value in starting to swing round to scare Vader here. I think you could with Gideon, for instance. I think the hard 3 right puts him in quite a nice position. He's unlikely to get shot by much. The Grand Inquisitor is going to be going to finish off Hellrunner.
He just needs to get out of the way anyway, right? Because he's in everyone else's way. So if you're going to get out of the way, may as well.
And then he's not in a horrible position for the next turn either. Yeah. So then at that point, if you bank Sane up, get a couple of shots on Vader, I think I'd be looking at Vader as the most points I could score, and cross fingers with a bit of bad dice, maybe the easiest because he's the one who doesn't have access to the evade. Yes, absolutely. And then I think the only other realistic option is to go for the Grand Inquisitor. I think Gideon may as well do the hard 3 anyway because he can't do anything else of note. Iden and Dell may as well head towards the Grand Inquisitor because they're going to end up in that position anyway. They can't really threaten Vader this turn because I think this turn and the turn after you're likely to be able to get decent quality shots into Vader.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I think it sounds a little bit like you're splitting fire between the 2 ships, but I think it mostly makes sense, right? You want to not give up anything too easily. Yeah,
I think you are, but I think given the position the ships are in, you're going to be whatever you do. And so I suppose to maybe try and say that in a more succinct way, I think the ship I'm going for here is Vader. Sane and Gideon can start firing at him this turn. Iden and Dell can't, so may as well take some shots at the Inquisitor on their way to next turn turning in on Vader. Versus getting one more shot this turn on the Grand Inquisitor, but then being in a position where you likely have to K-turn half your list to continue firing at him next turn. It feels like your good turn of well-modded focus fire with the TIE Swarm is not this turn, but next turn. And it's at a Vader who is going to be in the top right-hand corner of the board. So I think that's what I'm setting up for.
No, fair enough. And just before Guy reveals his dials, just worth pointing out because it disappears later, Whisper does have an evade there from the decloak. But she's about to go and it's about to disappear.
Okay. Presumably then you remember it at a key moment.
Absolutely.
So Gideon with the 2 bank clears stress. Still putting pressure on Vader, but maybe not quite so much as the 3 hard would have done. But does open the dial up.
Clears that rock as well. It's not an obvious one when you're the one setting the move.
I mean, that might have been in Guy's head, certainly. I'm pretty confident it did.
So again, I think what he was looking at here, and there's the pause there as he takes the focus, is he was looking at barrel rolling Gideon to the right to threaten Vader a bit more.
Yeah, and I like the barrel roll. In fact, actually, the 2 bank barrel roll may have been a better solution than the 3 hard because it has your dial more open for the next turn. But I think that the barrel roll probably was better than the focus there. Sane, as you predicted, K-turning, getting behind. And as I say, if he rolls a crit, then he starts to worry the Grand Inquisitor.
Yeah, we've not spoken about Sane yet in this game, but the ability of Sane, especially with marksmanship, is a constant threat for the Grand Inquisitor, right? Like it's something you have to always be aware of.
Yeah.
Guy does a really nice job of bringing the ties in and sort of boxing in the Grand Inquisitor and everything clearing and getting actions as well.
Both of those last 2 moves were very, very well judged. You can see clearing Howrunner by less than a millimeter by the looks of things, and Dell equally close to Iden. So yeah, both very nice. It's a shame for Hal here that he's just drifting away, but at least does the other advantage of that kind of getting up close and personal with the Inquisitor there is it does stop him repositioning to kind of get closer to Howrunner, and with 1 force left, he has the choice between mods or range 1. He can't do everything he wants to.
Yeah, you must be a little bit worried about the Inquisitor here, I would have thought, at the time.
Yes, there's a little bit of kind of wiggle room in terms of options I have, but yeah, definitely it's not ideal by any stretch of the imagination. And so again, I'm looking here at whether the barrel roll fits to the right. It definitely doesn't.
That's what I wondered.
You desperately need it to, and you sit and look at it for a bit longer to make sure. It's one of those.
Yeah, I'm very guilty of that. It's been like, well, I want this to fit so much.
If I think hard enough, it'll fit one day.
And so again, just token up.
Yeah, and Iden and Dell in a beautiful position here and can do exactly as you said. They're scaring the Inquisitor. They stop him spending offensive mods probably at all, because killing Howl Runner is not worth getting the Inquisitor halved. Actually points wise, points wise doesn't work either because Howl Runner is already halved. So very nice. I'm just not convinced that Sane adds much to that threat, barring the sort of lucky crit roll.
Yeah, which is one in 4.
Yeah, it's not nothing, certainly. And Whisper here doing a nice job in that he's sort of managed to avoid most of the arcs, but being in a position to come back in and be relevant should he be needed.
I like that Guy went slow enough with Iden and Dell that you didn't bump into either of them. It just maximizes.
Yes, absolutely, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an interesting point, right? So blocks are good, but only if you have the follow-up fire. So there are situations, and this is one of them, where Guy is much better off with 2 shots into an Inquisitor who is able to focus than he would have been with one of these ships bumped.
And just to go back to something we talk a lot about here, so I've said in the last round that Vader now has an opportunity to come down and completely murder Sane, but with the situation that Grand Inquisitor is in, the plan now changes, right? And so now Vader's role here is to keep Grand Inquisitor alive.
So from that, I presume we're going to see, the bank in to try and strip a focus off one of these guys.
And this is, as we talk about all the time, right? Reassess the situation constantly. Like having had a plan for 2 turns to go around and kill Sane, now the plan becomes, what do I do to keep Grand Inquisitor alive?
Yeah.
So I have a range 2 obstruct into Iden or a range 3 into Dell, so they're the same to all intents and purposes.
And Iden worth more points here, so I think I would take the shot on Iden, and that's where your target lock goes. I think whilst we watch these shots come in, to go back to Whisper's position, I think it would have been easy there for Lloyd to just run with Whisper, to be worried about him and get him out of there. But it's risky, and it means that should the Inquisitor, die here, for instance, and Lloyd suddenly needs to score a lot of points, then it's all on Vader to do it. So something to think about when making decisions to disengage. So a big hit from Vader, but good dice from Iden there. Spends the focus, so job done in terms of keeping the Grand Inquisitor safe.
Yeah, so Iden is now a lot less scary. And so to remind you, we were talking about Grand Inquisitor earlier. What is Grand Inquisitor's ability? Pop quiz.
He can spend his force to either give himself a range 1 bonus beyond range 1 or remove the range 1 bonus from someone else.
Exactly. Now Iden's only rolling 2 or Dell is only rolling 2.
Well, I can I've already made Iden's shot less modded, and now I can make the other one less modded by taking away, or not less modded, but take away 1 red die.
And that's more value, right? Because the focus with 3 reds. Yeah. Interesting.
So we saw a Grand Inquisitor shot coming in there. I think only rolls 1 hit kind of naturally, and Hal gets the 1 focus, and so Hal surviving and staying alive. And we've got the Sane shot in at range 2 at the Grand Inquisitor, so looking for crits here to have any realistic chance of damaging. And gets the 1 hit, so the Grand Inquisitor with 3 dice should be okay. And is. And absolutely, and sort of to hammer home what you're saying further, and now the choice of who to remove that extra dice from is clear. You remove it from the one with the fewer mods, with the more mods, right? So you don't want Dell taking 3 dice focus with a reroll. So you accept the 3 dice with only a single reroll from Iden. Do something to offense. So that's the Iden.
Yeah, that's Iden shooting first.
And you can see the importance of him not having a focus there. Has a reroll for hit crit, and not a great start, but have the focus there to spend. So no harm done so far, and only 1 more shot to survive. And the other sort of bit of maths here is that because attack dice are naturally better than evade dice, and with the mods, that you're certainly better off removing an attack dice than you are keeping that focus for the evade. And that's sort of not even close, but hit crit coming in from the 2 dice. Oof, and 2 evades. Nicely done. And so the Inquisitor was never worried.
Yeah, and
Always
again,
knew he was going to be fine.
Inquisitor's clearly a little bit lucky there, but in a situation where you've removed the scariness of both of those attacks, right? You've stripped Odin's token, and then you've taken away one of Dale's dice. So what looks to be 6 dice, both double modded, becomes a lot less, and it gives you the opportunity to at least get your way out of it.
Yeah. And the key was, as you said, changing the plan with Vader. How easy would it have been to be laser focused on Sane's there, vulnerable, no tokens, I can boost in, get my lock, and that's all brilliant. But the trade for probably half of Sane is what you expect to do, is very possibly a halved Inquisitor. It would have been hit, crit, and he just started taking damage.
And you have to be willing to do that with not a great shot with Vader, right? It's through a rock.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, so you like being willing to take that not great shot, but the value of it is huge. So that's something to remember.
Yeah. So I'm up by 9 points.
Oof.
So again, Paul, if you want to take maybe the role of the Tie Swarm, what would you do in this situation? And Ben, if you want to take the role of me, say what I should have done.
So I think the Tie Swarm is the same as my plan from the previous turn. I think that Vader has to be the target here. Howl Runner on 1 health with a blinded pilot as well, I don't think has a choice other than to run. And with Howl Runner running, I think that if you were to go for the Grand Inquisitor, that would involve K-turns from most of your list, poorly modified shots, and we've seen how hard the Inquisitor is to damage. So for me, I think I'm 2 harding Sane in the hope that Vader messes up and bumps him. I'm 1 harding Gideon and focusing to get shots into that bumped Vader. And then a sort of combination of 1 hards on Iden and maybe a 2 bank from Del, all to turn towards Vader, hope to get the range 1 shots. And I think with the 2 hard, 2 bank and 1 hard, that actually there aren't many safe places for Vader to go. So that's my plan, and I can't really see any good alternatives to that.
So Ben, what's your plan?
Well, the first thing was I kind of wish Whisper had K-turned last turn, because yes, it's kind of risky, but I also thought it was unlikely that everyone would go after Whisper. Because how does Whisper turn around nicely here? You can only decloak right and do a small K-turn, and that's quite far away. So Whisper's not much of a threat, right? Unless I'm misreading things. Gideon's definitely going to turn right. Iden and Del, just like if you're looking there reading what he can do, Iden and Del can threaten Vader. The Inquisitor can just chase Hellrunner, I think. Like, that's fine. Hellrunner could go left, but it's unlikely. So Hellrunner's probably running right. So Inquisitor banks after Hellrunner and hopes is my first instinct. But I'm like, where Vader goes doesn't seem very obvious to me. You can kind of hard 1 right because Gideon can't really block you, and you can just remove Gideon, I think.
Doesn't have a hard 1 right.
He doesn't have a hard 1 right, so undo that. You can hard 2 right.
We'll lose that in the edit. It's fine. Go again.
No, it's fine. Vader's in a tricky spot. Really tricky. Do you just go fast and embrace the bump? That's not good because he needs that lock.
And again, we spoke about it at the start of the game, but with the Inquisitor moving before Hellrunner, if Hellrunner comes left, the Inquisitor can get shots on him. But actually, it's quite hard for the Inquisitor to chase Gideon, who we know is turning in, or Hellrunner should he go right.
Yeah.
Because he can't go through Hellrunner. Hellrunner's blocking that there. So the Inquisitor's in a tricky spot.
Yeah, he can get away for free, really.
Yeah, I think with Inquisitor, you either hope that Hellrunner is turning to the left and just sort of do the 2 straight or the 1 bank. Or I think I'd be tempted by the Talon roll to try and get more fire. Although I don't think that much fire comes into the Grand Inquisitor if he's Talon rolling. But he does leave himself on 1/4, so it might be quite an aggressive move. It also puts him in a position, though, with 2 turns left in the game where he can be useful the turn after this as well. So we do see the decloak from Whisper here. Whisper obviously trying to become relevant, and I presume is about to 1 hard right to kind of, if not get a shot this turn, then get a shot the turn after. And then we'll see what the ties are up to.
Yeah, my plan was definitely to try and threaten Hellrunner. So I took a lock on it a previous turn in the idea that it might threaten her out of the fight, but I was feeling like I had a bit of a feel for the guy in the way he was playing. I thought he might try and slip out to the left.
Yeah.
So we'll come back to in a second. With Vader, I think I was looking at. I felt again that Guy was probably going for Grand Inquisitor, which is what he actually does.
Right.
And so the opportunity to take more points with a slow rolling Vader and just put locks into the side. And again, actually, one thing I do misjudge here is the one turn from Gideon that clearly fits all day. I completely ruled out because, again, at this point I was new to Bastille, and to me it looked like it was too close to the rock to call. And then, of course, when he does it, it's almost half a base length inside the rock. So that was the only one I'd really misjudged. But again, it means I'm only taking the one shot.
Oh, these tie moves make me sad. When he started, actually, I loved the T-bank from Sane because I thought, that's a much better solution. If Sane, am I too hard, leaves him stressed, not great. The T-bank, if he had barrel roll to the right here, it puts him in a similar position to block Vader, and also allows him to K-turn next turn to get shots back on Vader again, which is lovely. I just think it's so unlikely to do significant damage to Grand Inquisitor here with unmodded TIE fighters that I think Vader was the better choice. And it's tricky, right? Because Vader could disengage hard and he could end up with no shots, which would have been bad.
Yeah, because Vader could 3-turn left, right? Just block out entirely.
And to be fair, he still would have had shots, but they'd have been at range. But I think the combination of the Force and the evade just makes the Inquisitor too hard to shoot. But we shall see.
So the reason for this Inquisitor move is in case Guy one turns left with Howron and tries to barrel roll away from my Whisper. Which, as it is exactly what he does.
Imagine if Howrunner had just run away to the right. I think that's the better play there.
But on the plus side, right, Whisper, Howrunner is an I5, right? And so he has given himself a shot against Whisper.
That's absolutely true.
With the evade, unlikely to kill, but not impossible.
He does have blinded pilot as well.
Yeah. Oh, another one straight from Vader. Oh,
why'd they give him a one forward? Why?
my
There's
plan.
monsters.
My barrel roll from Sane. Oh, look. And presumably the barrel there just to get distance from Gideon, which makes sense. Yeah. And now in a position to do real harm to Sane or Iden, who has already taken 1 health.
Yeah, I need to put 1 damage into Iden for the points. I think it's the rationale for that.
Yeah, and also the differential in points, right? Iden is 41 points versus Sane, who is 31. So that's not insignificant either. Okay, so range 3 just to Iden.
Yep.
And then we spend force here because you're only taking the 1 incoming shot. The hit crit. And now Iden needs 2 evades to stay alive. Oof, and gets them, but takes a crit.
So at least half on Iden, so it gives me again a little bit of margin of error.
Oh no, it's a bigger margin of error.
and a bit of luck there. The most common crit in the deck. It's always slightly more likely than anything else, but obviously a massive benefit there to take Iden off. 1 before he's shot, and 2 to get that full 40 points. No shot here from Whisper.
And so again, having done all the effort to try and box Howrunner in, Whisper in fact doesn't have a shot because I slightly misjudged it.
But the Grand Inquisitor does. And I think he's just rolled natural hit crit, which is not bad. Not wanting to spend any mods. And that's Howrunner dead as well.
Howrunner takes her 3rd and 4th crit of the game before she dies.
Yeah. And the 3rd crit, so the 2nd crit I didn't bother to put up, but the 3rd I did. She takes a weapons failure, which is obviously
it's the one I was dreaming of when I'm ready to be shot. Yeah.
So now that range 1 shot is 2 dice and with a blinded pilot.
Oh god.
So now we cannot kill Whisper without a direct hit. I think to roll it back, and again it's easy in hindsight, but I think the added reason that we shouldn't really talk about in terms of going harder for the block on Vader was the fact he didn't have his lock set up. He was down to 1 force. Had you blocked him, not only is he in a scary position defensively, but he is much, much less damaging. And the likelihood is that a bumped Vader doesn't kill Iden there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so Hal goes off, doesn't do, blanks out, no damage into Whisper. And now we've just got some Hail Mary shots into the Grand Inquisitor here to try and get some points.
Let's kill Vader first.
Gideon, range 2. Oof, trying his best. 2 crits into blanks as well. And so Vader all of a sudden 1 off half. And for those of us who play Vader or have played Vader, that's how it goes, right? He's fine until all of a sudden he isn't, and then it's terrifying. But still above half. Not yet scored points there, and needs to get half points here on the Inquisitor to have a chance going into the final turn. You feel? I think just range 2 and not in the bullseye, so no marksmanship. But 1 hit, and is fine. And now taking 2 unmodded dice with focus and evade, incredibly unlikely to take any damage. And 1 hit, and in fact is not going to take any damage, is absolutely fine. So 1 turn left, points-wise. Killing Vader is enough. Halving Vader and halving the Grand Inquisitor is not.
Yeah, he needs to kill Vader.
At most, he's going to get 2 shots on Vader. And even then, that's only if you put him in a weird spot. Talk us through your thoughts. I'm tired of predicting your moves and being wrong, so just tell me what you're thinking.
So Gideon seems the most obvious, right? Gideon is going to turn after Vader and just try and keep his arc wide.
Yeah.
So in my head, I was thinking actually Grand Inquisitor can pursue that, and even if somehow everything goes perfectly for him and he kills Vader, if Grand Inquisitor halves Gideon in the process, that's still enough points. So I was kind of trying to build insurance in there a little bit. Whisper from this point has, I think, again, no decloak options, but is out of the fight and is just running to preserve points, and then it's just trying to work out what I want to do with Vader.
Yeah.
So Dale has the least good options. So can 1 turn right and stay stressed, can do anything else to try and pursue Grand Inquisitor. And based on how he's played the last few turns and where Sane is, I feel like that's the most likely option. Mm-hmm. So I'm expecting Dale to 2-bank and focus and try and get shots on the Grand Inquisitor, and Sane to go up and try and maybe even block that. Mm-hmm. And then Gideon I expected to come swooping in with the anticipation that Vader would also go fast. So I get slightly greedy with Grand Inquisitor, as we'll see, just to keep it interesting for the last round.
I mean, the way you talked about it, though, it's also how I often look at the final turn of a game. Like, there's just something in me. I really don't like running away with literally everyone, and you sort of, but you look at the points, like there's not really much reason not to, but it still feels like hard to not. But yeah, but I got a really good shot here. Why wouldn't I?
Yes, I could, just 5 forward with Vader, right? But if Sane and Dale both 1 turn left and Gideon 3 turns right, then he gets a whole bunch of shots into me and I might lose, right?
I think you need to be very clear in the final turns of a game, even more so than everywhere else, why the purpose of each move you make.
Yeah.
And you go from the guys with no choice to the guys with choice. So Whisper cannot decloak and get into the fight. So Whisper is running away. So Whisper is probably safe. He's not taking any shots, but he's not going to kill anything to score you any more points. So then the rest of your moves are informed by that, and it's all about kind of likelihood of losing points. So I suppose worst case scenario for Lloyd here is that he could lose the entire Grand Inquisitor and Darth Vader. Incredibly unlikely, but possible given the ships left on the board, and therefore feels like he needs to be in a position to take some shots. And I think that you're making the decisions for the correct reason there. The worry about disengaging with Vader is that he gets clinked at range 3 and gets halved, and the other 2 deal with the Inquisitor, and so that's the reason to try and get more points off the board.
So the idea is that the Grand Inquisitor is to threaten Gideon to ideally half him if everything goes perfectly, but if not, again, stripping that token just reduces the expected damage output. So from here again, just an easy decision with Grand Inquisitor. He needs to give up 2 damage to get halved. He has a single shot coming in. There's a 2-die attack.
I think that is an incredibly good judgment if that's true. I think I'd have worried that was range 1. However, even then, the focus, the evade is the correct choice, right? Because you need to roll 1 paint to not get halved, even at range 1.
Grand Inquisitor can spend a force again to turn off Dale's range 1, even if it is.
Of course. So he's safe. So not score any points on. I think the one slightly strange choice with Vader, I thought at the time,
is because I was anticipating Gideon going fast to try and catch me if I disengage. So doing this means that Gideon overshoots me and I can barrel all away and dodge that arc entirely.
Okay.
It does leave him 1 shot, which is sane. And since everything has now moved, I can tell you the shot he needs to win is say he needs to put hit crit into Vader. Vader needs to blank at range 3 and take a hit and a direct hit.
And so that sounds unlikely until you
It's aimed
realise
at marksmanship.
you're
That's marksmanship, yeah.
Oh no. Oh no. I can't.
It's fine, it's unmodded, right? Oh wait, there's 2 hits. That becomes hit crit. So Guy has done his part.
Yeah, and actually not only has he done his part, but he thinks really clearly here. So I think it would have been very easy to default to spending that crit to half Vader.
Yep, absolutely.
Right? And I think it's incredibly clear thinking at this point in the game. You know, it's a game you're playing in the evening. It's been going for an hour and sort of 30 minutes at this point. To be able to understand the game situation enough to realise that no, however unlikely it is, Vader needs to die. It's not good enough halving him because of everything you said about the Grand Inquisitor is unhalfable at this stage. And so does let it ride. And unfortunately, the unlikely doesn't happen there. Vader makes up for his last round, getting the 2 evades.
Oh, the way you said it earlier, I was worried.
and is safe. And then we get the range 2 shot here from Dell as the final shot in the game. And 1 hit, which is auto-evaded. Grand Inquisitor rolling 2. And Lloyd taking it, 109 points to 36.
I thought you both played really well though. Like just every turn was like really interesting. Like they weren't just obvious. Like okay, well this game's done. You know, like the fact that even you're that many points ahead, but it's still a worry at the end.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those games where even though I think we both played well, there's definitely things both of us can take from that and be like, oh, this could have been slightly done differently.
Oh, yeah.
This could have been better for sure. Like, there's always something, and that's
Yes.
why I like having games recorded, is a chance to go back and review your own performance and see what you could have done better, what you could have done differently, where you made an assumption that was wrong.
So let's go through that, and I'll kick off here. I'm kind of going right from the start of the game. I think that you won turn 0. So I think a kind of learning point for Guy is to go back and look at that turn 0 and could he have made his life easy with the rocks? And I think, you know, in hindsight, the solution may have been to heavily load his side of the board with rocks. And to have a more open area of the board that he was flying into, often making your first few turns difficult, negotiating your way through rocks on your side of the board pays off by having that opening engagement with your ships flying into the open with all of their K turns and Talon rolls, etc., open for turn 2 of the engagement, and your opponent all of a sudden heading into the rocks that you place on your side of the board. So I thought his opening was nice, and actually he maybe cut his options down on that first turn, but did a nice job of kind of recovering from that. And I think my only other kind of criticism of Guy might be I felt like maybe in the mid game, you know, on those sort of 2 or 3 turns before the end of the game, I think his target priority was maybe not optimal, and I think he was sort of feeling behind and went for getting the weight of fire into the Inquisitor with numerous rounds of poor quality shots. When maybe there was the opportunity to accept that he needed a turn where he wasn't going to get much, but it would give him better quality fire into something in future turns. And for me, that thing would have been Vader, but it could have been Inquisitor or Whisper. I feel like there was an opportunity somewhere in the middle of the game there to have a sort of reset turn and get genuine quality fire into something for the end game, rather than constantly having a mix of kind of poorly modified and slightly better modified shots. And then for you, Lloyd, in my opinion, I think that turn 0 was perfect. I think you made really sensible choices in the mid to end game. But I think that you definitely could have got Whisper and Vader into position through those rocks better. And actually, had you done so, that I think that this would have been quite a one-sided game. If Whisper, if that 3-turn rather than the 2-turn small things, and if Vader had been ready to threaten kind of a turn earlier, I feel like that it would have been a lot easier and you would have felt a lot less under pressure. So how about you, Ben?
I think all the things you say are true. I think I like to look at things with like broad brush as well, in terms of like as a game flow around the map, and I think that was played nicely, you know, like looking where you're in danger and accept, but I did feel like Vader shouldn't be as worried at the end like that. And I agree with going after the Inquisitor there were a couple of turns where like you kind of K-turning, chasing him instead of turning onto a new target. It just slips away from you. You can feel it in games like that, where you're like, I need to get this guy, and every turn that you're not getting him, you just feel the game slipping away.
Yeah, and then the moment of realization is always, I do it myself. It's always 2 turns too late. It's 2 turns into that process when you go, I'm shooting at the wrong thing.
Yeah,
I'm in a bad place. I know 2 turns ago I should have done this. And so I think congratulations on the win, Lloyd, and we'll leave it to you to kind of round it up and see us out.
I think the main thing I would take from this is turn 0 was so huge. And I think what we'll try and do is link to the podcast episode that Andrew Pattison talks about playing against tie swarms and how to set rocks up, because I think he explains it much more eloquently than I do. So we'll try and link to that, and that's a really useful resource.
I'm glad that we are going to try and link to that.
Good luck with that, Paul.
I think there's also a turn 0 article from Paul Heaver, which I will try and dig out of FFG's archives and link both of those. I think that's a real good.
There's a series of them, yeah.
Yeah, subtitle for this episode maybe is turn 0. Cool. And with that, I'd like to say thank you to Guy for allowing us to record the game and for putting up such a good showing and really, really making Lloyd work for it. Cheers again to Ben for coming on. As always, excellent kind of insight and really good points raised. And thanks very much to Lloyd for letting us show you a game.
I hope it was worth it. I hope everyone enjoyed it.
Cheers everyone for watching. Continue to like and subscribe as you have been doing. We're really pleased with how well it's going down and the number of people watching. Tell your friends and join us again next Tuesday for another episode. Thanks very much.
Bye.